Ladies and gentlemen, this is Ballet Rate. It is with great joy that we present to you today the full ballet analysis of one of our favorite ballets of all time. We've only spent like the last 2.5 years of this channel's existence raving about this ballet every single time it's mentioned. So like, honestly, it's a little cruel that we haven't done a full analysis on it until today.
Disappointing, heartless even.
A little bit. But the wait ends today, you guys.
Yes.
We are finally doing a deep dive into the one, the only
Firebird.
I've been waiting for this day!
Now the ballet, The Firebird, may be a short one-act ballet, but there is actually so much detail and brilliance just packed into a, honestly, euphoric 45 minutes.
So today's video is basically just going to be a very long, very enthusiastic info dump about everything that you probably missed in The Firebird, so that next time you watch it, you'll understand exactly why we love it a very normal amount.
Completely casual amount.
Very casual.
So if you are ready for your ballet nerdness to go completely feral on this video, then make sure you tap the like button and let's get into it. Firstly, of course, the context for the ballet, because the more you understand something, the more you can appreciate it. That's right.
So, the Firebird's conception begins in 1909 with our wonderful man, Sergei Diaghilev, and he was the founder of the famous Ballet Russe, which was one of the most prominent, notable ballet companies of the time in Paris.
Now, in terms of the artistic landscape at the time, Russian folklore was actually kind of in vogue and was highly trending in the West, and so obviously, riding the trends, Diaghilev was really interested in creating a ballet that would kind of showcase Russian art and that sort of aesthetic to the Paris audiences.
I think it's kind of funny how so many ballets were created based on like what was trending at the time.
Like what's in at the moment.
Yeah, like everyone says nowadays, oh, you know, everyone's just focused on chasing trends. They were chasing trends back then too. Don't worry, you guys.
Nothing has changed.
But anyway, back to Diaghilev.
Yes.
He was actually facing some financial issues with the ballet company at the time. So he needed a ballet, a good one that would go viral, hopefully, for the 1910 season of the Ballet Russe.
So amongst him and his team, the concept was brought up to create the ultimate Russian fairy tale ballet that would both please the audiences and kind of show them all of what Russian art and music had to offer. And this, of course, would eventually become the Firebird.
There are a lot of different inspirations that went into creating the Firebird as a ballet.
Yes.
So to create the Firebird, Diaghilev, together with his creative team, wove together several very famous Russian folktales, centering, of course, around the Firebird. Now, the Firebird is a mythical bird common in Slavic folklore and fairy tales, closely resembling a falcon and mostly characterized by majestic, magical golden feathers that glowed like flames.
In most of these tales, the Firebird is sort of this really highly sought-after creature, but when you do find her, it's kind of like a two-edged sword in a way, as capturing her or even finding one of her feathers on one hand will give you like divine protection and power, but on the flip side, it also comes with a lot of extra troubles and danger and kind of, you know, put the big target on your head, that kind of thing.
So it's like a blessing and a curse.
Exactly. The rest of the cast and what we know as the Firebird today is also made up of common characters from various folk tales.
One folk tale in particular is Ivan the Firebird and the Grey Wolf, and this tale features what will soon become our male protagonist, Ivan Tsarevich, and his hunt to capture the Firebird. He is helped along the way by a Grey Wolf, obviously, as per title, and is eventually able to capture the Firebird and then marry a beautiful princess who eventually becomes Tsarevna in the ballet.
The Firebird also appears in a story called The Firebird and the Princess Vasilisa, also featuring a huntsman who captures a Firebird, this time with the help of his horse, and then marries the princess in the end. So there's a lot of overlap between those two stories.
The Firebird also makes an appearance in The Little Humpbacked Horse, which is again about an Ivan being tasked with capturing the Firebird among other very impossible tasks, and he is helped obviously by his magical little humpbacked horse. And marries the princess in the end.
And side note, The Little Humpbacked Horse is in itself a separate ballet, but that's another topic for another video.
A different analysis?
maybe.
So we have our protagonists laid out, but as for our antagonist, Kotschei, Kotschei, he was also a very frequent feature in Russian folklore. He was also called Kotschei the Deathless or Kotschei the Immortal. And Kotschei is a sorcerer, and in the ballet, he's portrayed as a very old, grotesque, demonic force. And as his name suggests, Kotschei the Deathless, he has a spell that prevents him from dying.
Yes. And sort of the way the spell works is by removing his soul from his body and hiding it in various objects or animals to protect it. According to the original legend, his soul is first hidden in a needle, which is hidden in an egg, then hidden in a duck, which is hidden in a rabbit, and then finally locked away in a chest and hidden somewhere entirely remote. Obviously, that's a little complicated for the ballet to portray. So in the ballet, as you'll see in a second, it's just his soul hidden in an egg, which is hidden in a chest.
So obviously, because his soul is hidden away in these objects, the only way to kill Kotschei for real is by destroying the object containing his soul, which, spoiler alert, we will see later in the ballet.
In many of these tales, Kotschei's sort of main thing is capturing girls away from their lovers, and that part of Kotschei's legend is definitely referenced in the ballet.
So now we have our 4 key characters. We have our prince named Ivan, our beautiful princess Tsarevna, our evil immortal sorcerer Kotschei, and of course the titular Firebird. You may be wondering why these characters specifically, and the exact combo of characters for the ballet may have been inspired by the 1844 poem A Winter's Journey by Yakov Polonsky that includes the lines, "And in my dreams I see myself on a wolf's back, riding along a forest path, to do battle with a sorcerer's Tsar, Kotschei, in that land where a princess sits under lock and key," which will be Princess Tsarevna and the 12 other princesses, "pining behind massive walls. Their gardens surround a palace all of glass. There firebirds sing by night," obviously, and peck at golden fruit, which you'll also see in the ballet. So there you go.
So now that the concept of this ultimate Russian fairy tale ballet was in motion, Diaghilev, of course, needed the dream team who would bring this vision to life. The choreographer he chose was Mikhail Fokine, who at the time was a resident choreographer for the Ballet Russe. You probably heard his name before. Fokine has done many other very famous ballets, including Petrushka, Scheherazade, The Dying Swan, and Spectre de la Rose, another beautiful ballet.
As for the music for the ballet, Diaghilev's first choice to write the score of the Firebird was Nikolai Tsarevna, whom he'd worked with before on another ballet. But unfortunately, Tsarevna actually withdrew from the project.
So obviously attempt 1 to find a composer fell through, but nothing daunted, there are several other options on Diaghilev's roster. So in September of 1909, Diaghilev reached out to Anatoly Lyadov in hopes of having him composed the score for the Firebird. Lyadov was actually very interested and very excited about composing the ballet, but the only issue is that Lyadov was actually notoriously slow at composing, and he couldn't meet the short time frame for the production of the ballet, and so unfortunately he declined also.
Diaghilev, probably becoming a bit alarmed at this point, considered a few other options, including Nikolai Sokolov and even Alexander Glazunov, who was the one to compose the score for the ballet Raymonda. Unfortunately, all of these offers fell through. So that left Diaghilev with no one to compose the score for his amazing ultimate Russian fairy tale ballet.
So with all of his options running out, and obviously with, a pretty tight deadline for this ballet, Diaghilev decided to take a gamble that we were all very thankful that he took. And this, of course, was Igor Stravinsky. Now, Stravinsky at the time was very young, only about 28 at the time, very eager, but also largely unknown as a composer. But the one thing he had going for him is that he was the student or protege of the great Rimsky-Korsakov. So Diaghilev decided, you'll do. It was definitely a risk, a calculated risk, but a risk nonetheless. But eventually, as you'll see by the end of this video, it worked out perfectly.
Paid off so well.
It paid off so good. And we're still raving about it today. Stravinsky, of course, was absolutely thrilled to be on the project. I mean, like young, enthusiastic, that kind of deal. So thrilled, in fact, that he reportedly began working on sketches of the ballet before Diaghilev had even given him a formal commission offer. Of course, most of his initial drafts and sketches were kind of left to the wayside once the ballet actually began to take shape because it didn't really fit the developing artistic direction of the ballet.
Right.
But that being said, you just got to admire the enthusiasm.
According to Mikhail Fokine, the choreographer, he and Stravinsky worked together very closely on the ballet. As a matter of fact, Fokine did write about his experiences working with Stravinsky in his memoir. I remember how he brought me a beautiful Russian melody for the entrance of Ivan Tsarevich. I suggested not presenting the complete melody all at once, but just a hint of it by means of separate notes. At the moments when Ivan appears at the wall, when he observes the wonders of the enchanted garden, and when he leaps over the wall.
Stravinsky played and I interpreted the role of Tsarevich, the piano substituting for the wall. I climbed over it, jumped down from it, and crawled, fear-struck, looking around my living room. Stravinsky, watching, accompanied me with patches from the Tsarevich's melodies, playing mysterious tremolos in the background to depict the garden of the sinister Kotschei, the Deathless. So it was a very collaborative effort.
Yes.
Very, very hands-on from both parties.
So Stravinsky worked on the score of the Firebird starting around October or November of 1909. And he had it finished in a whopping 6 months and fully orchestrated by May of 1910. Which is again a testament to his enthusiasm and honestly his genius as well. Ballet writing is not easy, you guys.
Stravinsky was very deeply invested in the whole production process and reportedly was present for pretty much every rehearsal to sort of assist the dancers in understanding the complicated rhythms and the music and everything like that.
He would often come early before rehearsal even began, just to play like the more difficult passages over and over and over again until the dancers understood it. Another funny note about the rehearsal process for this ballet is that the Firebird required not one but 2 dress rehearsals before the premiere. Because what had happened is the dancers had just gotten used to hearing the piano rendition of the score.
Yeah, because Stravinsky would play the accompaniment for them on the piano.
For the rehearsals.
Exactly.
So when they got on stage and they were dancing with the full orchestra, it threw them off so much that several of them kept missing their cues and whatnot.
So it took 2 dress rehearsals
to get it right.
Before the premiere.
And get everybody on stage at the right time.
Exactly. Kind of a funny side note, but it just shows how avant-garde Stravinsky's music was at the time.
Especially for ballet.
As for the costumes and sets of the premiere production of the Firebird, all of these were done by Alexander Golovin and Leon Bakst. We'll just give you a moment to appreciate them because the artwork that went into this production is absolutely breathtaking.
And I feel like one of the trademarks of the Firebird in general, in terms of sets and costumes, is just how opulent and how saturated the colors were. And all of the designs use these really bright, very vibrant colors, which were honestly kind of rare for ballet at the time. Like if you look at Swan Lake, you look at Giselle, they're all like pale colors and
muted tones. Very gentle scenery, but not the Firebird.
We see color, we see vibrancy, we see just magical, saturated scene.
It's like ethereal, but in the other direction. You know, it's not like blue and floaty and cloudy. It's like it's bright and it's striking.
Yes. As for the choreography itself, Mikhail Fokine utilized much more interpretive movements for this ballet instead of sticking to strictly classical lines. Like for the monsters and for Kotschei, for example, they move with a really raw, sort of grotesque, wild way. And then the princesses, on the other hand, use very soft gestures and human-like mime. And the Firebird herself, which you'll see in a moment, while she does dance classically, she carries a very different energy than a lot of the ballets prior to this, especially for the principal ballerina's role.
The Firebird wasn't meant to be graceful or soft in the way most ballet roles traditionally expected. Instead, the concept for the Firebird was sort of to make her this powerful, elusive, magical force that's never quite human and ultimately very, very lethal.
And obviously the choreography demonstrates this beautifully with these really sharp bird-like movements, quick darting of the head, and just surging with like this raw power in every step.
Finally, this lands us at the very first premiere of the Firebird, and thanks to the amazing collaborations of people and artists, the vision of the Firebird finally came to fruition on June 25th of 1910 at the Palais Garnier in Paris. Our very first original cast of the Firebird was Tamara Tsarevna as the Firebird, and the choreographer himself, Mikhail Fokine, danced Prince Ivan. Vera Fokina danced the 13th Princess Tsarevna the Beautiful, and Alexis Bulgakov performed the sorcerer Kotschei the Immortal.
And despite all the bumps in the roads, all the risks taken, and all the tight deadlines, to the great joy of all involved, the reception reception for the Firebird was overwhelmingly positive.
Yes.
With the choreography, music, sets, and costumes each praised as masterful both of their own merit and also together as a unified work.
Stravinsky himself was launched immediately into stardom in one single night and earned praise from countless figures in the Paris arts scene. The great success of the Firebird kind of served as a catalyst for Stravinsky's personal career, and this would lead to other similarly acclaimed creative endeavors with Diaghilev, including Petrushka, and more famously, or infamously, The Rite of Spring.
And the Firebird itself, of course, has lived on and has become a permanent treasure in both the ballet and the classical music repertoire alike.
There are several other versions of the Firebird, of course, aside from the Fokine Ballet Russe production, one of which being the Balanchine version of the Firebird, which originally premiered in 1949, so several years after. And the Firebird was actually one of the very first works that Balanchine ever did for the New York City Ballet. Instead of using the entire full score of Stravinsky's The Firebird, Balanchine's version utilizes the 1945 version of the Firebird suite. So it's quite a bit shorter and the story's a little bit more compacted, but nonetheless, still the Firebird.
The beautiful Maria Tallchief danced the Firebird for Balanchine's first premiere of the ballet, kind of mirroring Stravinsky's journey with the Firebird and with Ballet Russe. The Balanchine production of the Firebird was also sort of the first major hit production for New York City Ballet. It's kind of cool how like the two separate versions of the ballet were both sort of this big catalyst for these huge successes of these famous artists.
Obviously, there are several other and maybe even countless productions and versions of the Firebird, as different companies all over the world have created their own version of the Firebird, including more modern renditions and interpretations as well. But those two, the Balanchine version and of course the beloved original Fokine version, are definitely the most recognizable in the repertoire. And so that is the Firebird that we know and love today.
It's kind of beautiful how over the years the Firebird has sort of unintentionally been the breakout point for so many artists over the years, and of course has been the vehicle that pushes the art of ballet and music further than ever before. And honestly, we just hope for many audiences who come to see the Firebird for the first time that the Firebird will continue to be that first spark for them, for their lifelong love of the arts that will continue to burn for generations afterwards.
We're about to launch headlong into the synopsis of the ballet, but first we're going to give you guys a very quick disclaimer. We will be showing various clips of the ballet, and in case you haven't watched the Firebird, the costuming can be very grotesque.
Yeah, a little bit grotesque.
A little scary, and so we just want to put that out there for all of our younger audiences. If you're a parent, maybe skip ahead, watch it first, and make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. So we're just putting it out there, just a little disclaimer. We're being responsible, letting you know ahead of time. But with that aside, we're going to go right ahead with the synopsis of the ballet, so enjoy. Now onto the synopsis or the plot of the ballet, which is, let's be honest, probably the reason why you're here.
Yeah.
Now, the ballet, The Firebird, is actually pretty short by ballet standards, only one act and approximately 45 minutes long, as opposed to the general 2 to 3 act ballet that runs from an hour and a half to 2 hours long. However, the story is absolutely packed, not just with story by literary means, but also with layers of music and leitmotifs and little choreographic elements and other tiny nuances that can be really easily missed or overlooked.
So consider this our indulging in a yap session about our hyperfixation ballet. It's the shortest ballet we've analyzed so far, but it might be the longest video.
That's how much we love the Firebird.
The ballet opens with the most haunting theme imaginable,
Yes.
played on the low strings like the bass and cello. Now this theme is more than just scene music. It is actually the very first and probably the most important leitmotif of the entire ballet.
I know the curtain hasn't even opened yet. We've barely even started the analysis, but we're going to interrupt the feed for a second with music theory from dummies. Not for dummies, from dummies.
Because we are not music theory experts.
Not expert. We are not claiming to be experts.
Heavens no.
We're here for the ballet, and the music is a part of the ballet, and so we're going to share that part with you. Stravinsky did not just throw notes at a page and call it ballet. Nope, he went into this with a plan, with a strategy. And this concept was one that he learned from his teacher, like we mentioned before, Rimsky-Korsakov. And this whole concept was creating a very clear delineation between the mortal characters and the immortal or ethereal characters. Ivan and the princess, which are our mortal characters, and obviously the Firebird Firebird and Kotschei, the immortal characters. So basically the way Stravinsky goes about this is that he has all of our human mortal characters voiced by melodies on a diatonic scale, either major or minor. And all of our supernatural characters are voiced off of melodies based off a chromatic scale.
So what is the difference between these two different kinds of scales? The chromatic scale, in simple terms, is made up of exclusively half steps rather than a combo of full steps and half steps like the diatonic scales. And so the result is that the chromatic scale has a very glossy, sparkly, more ethereal feel.
Kind of magical.
Kind of magical. Yeah. And so that's obviously very fitting to voice all of our ethereal characters. So put simply, in very crude terms, diatonic equals mortal or human characters, and chromatic is our magic characters.
Yes.
Our chromatic characters. Ignore that.
Wow.
Moving on.
Wow.
This has been Music Theories for Dummies.
So now, returning back to our theme, our opening theme of the ballet, we can now recognize the chromaticness of this melody based off of exclusively half steps. This theme is played on very low tones in the strings, in this sort of haunting, sort of foreboding tone that kind of represents the landscape of the scene, which is in fact an enchanted garden or forest outside of Kotschei's castle.
The same theme continues on for quite some time, but then we introduce a new voice.
Yes.
The flutes and the oboes. This subtle change still maintains that magical and otherworldly sound because of the same chromatic theme, but suddenly it seems less evil and sinister and more sort of magical, ethereal, almost symbolizing the Firebird's presence coming over the garden. The curtain opens and we realize that we are exactly where the music has told us we are, in the middle of a very dark, foreboding, enchanted forest outside of Kotschei's castle in the dead of night.
As we take a closer look at the scene, there are several key elements, and every single piece of scenery, I think, for the Firebird has a very specific purpose, and nothing is just kind of ornamental. Everything has a meaning. Everything has a play in the story. One of the big features of the scene, there's usually a huge gate sort of barricading Kotschei's castle, because what has happened is that, obviously, just like in the story, the immortal sorcerer has taken captive 13 princesses, and they are currently under his lock. And true to the traditional folktale, no one has been able to successfully save them, which brings us to the next feature of the scene, which is the stone walls that look suspiciously as though they might have once been people.
This feature tells us that several brave princes and knights, etc., have tried to save the captured princesses, but none of them have been able to successfully destroy Kotschei, and instead have been turned to stone.
Perhaps one of the most notable elements of the scene is, of course, the golden apple tree, as is referenced in the poem that we talked about earlier. And as you'll hear in a moment in the music, the apples actually have their own moment. The little shiny falling, sort of plunking noises in the music represents the apples falling and kind of shimmering in the tree branches in general.
The golden apple tree, of course, holds quite a bit of significance in the story, and we'll see it featured quite a bit as we go on. Basically, everything good happens around the golden apple tree.
Yeah. Finally, our male ballet protagonist enters the scene, Prince Ivan, and he is first seen climbing over the stone wall and landing in the middle of Kotschei's garden. He is hunting in the enchanted woods, just like most princes in ballet. Go figure.
Yeah, Swan Lake, hunting in the forest. Sleeping Beauty, hunting in the forest.
La Bayadere
as well. Hunting in the forest.
Hunting in the forest. He's nothing new. Now Ivan is in search of the mystic golden apple tree. Although in some other versions or other interpretations, he is actively searching for the princesses. Other times still he's pursuing the Firebird herself. And in yet other interpretations, sometimes he's just innocently hunting for recreation.
Yeah, for fun. Regardless, as Ivan wanders through the forest, we as the audience really get to experience it with him in real time through the music. The music here is honestly incredibly immersive, and you can hear layers of different sounds. You can hear ominous footsteps, creatures stirring, and even certain motifs of the monsters that will reappear later in the ballet. It's like a surround sound enchanted forest simulation.
That's basically what this is. What's interesting is that there's actually no dancing in this scene at all, but it really captures the trepidation and the curiosity of our young Prince Ivan as he wanders deeper into the woods. I actually think that the lack of dancing kind of contributes to the humanness of it, which also creates contrast as we get into the ballet when we introduce our ethereal characters. But that's just a side note.
As Ivan gets closer to the castle, we are introduced to Kotschei's theme for the first time. 4 of the same notes followed by 5 descending chromatic notes. Make sure you put a pin in this melody because we will hear this a lot more throughout the ballet. In fact, we'll hear this theme every time the sorcerer appears.
Then suddenly the eerie music shifts with the tremolo on the violin and a fluttering sound on the flutes. The Firebird is approaching.
Ivan hides himself and watches in awe as the Firebird darts past him in a flurry of chromatic notes that climb higher and higher as she flies. In a second she's gone, but we still hear the echo of her in the music before it dissolves back into stillness. Now Ivan by this time is utterly captivated by the Firebird and decides within himself to capture her. We hear his sort of thought process shortly after as we're introduced to Ivan's theme, diatonic of course, played very softly on the oboe as he posts himself behind the golden apple tree and waits.
Sure enough, the Firebird returns to the scene, drawn to the golden apple tree, of course. And here we have the iconic Firebird variation, which is a fantastical whirlwind of a variation, but also immediately gives us a crystal clear image of who the Firebird is right at the start of the ballet. The music here is absolutely exquisite, you guys, as it really captures the freeness and the lightness, but also the raw, unrestrained power of the Firebird.
The piccolo is a feature instrument here, as it kind of emulates the warbling and screeching call or the voice of the Firebird. Again, traditionally modeled after a falcon.
So the screeching sounds kind of make sense in that context.
There's also a lot of pizzicato played on the violin, the strings being plucked rather than bowed.
Yes.
Which creates an almost clucking sound, kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
And obviously the harp is in there as well to add just this magical otherworldly element to the entire piece.
The variation itself, choreographically, is extremely challenging to dance, with the steps constantly changing direction to give us that really swift darting effect combined with just the sheer speed and power of it all.
She'll like turn this way and then she'll do a quick fight, soda shot that way, and then she'll turn again.
Coupe jet to end borrow back.
Yeah, exactly. Travel.
There's so many changes in direction, and it's hard to dance, but the final effect is breathtaking.
We're very familiar with the sort of bird motif.
Yeah.
In ballet, we have the swans. In Swan Lake, the dying swan, we have the bluebird, etc. The flapping motion, obviously, and this like timid hiding under one wing kind of deal.
Yeah.
Like this is very bird. You see this in a lot of ballet. But the Firebird brings it a completely different texture and energy entirely. Even though it might be a similar movement as the swans, there's less of this expansive breath to the movement here. And instead we sharpen the angles, we tighten the positions, and add lots more sort of this wrist and hand fluttering. She'll be like this sometimes.
The resulting effect is less restrained than a swan's might be, and even just a little contemporary, if you will. Doing this is a lot more contemporary compared to like the older ballets like Swan Lake and Sleeping Beauty. And this sort of conveys just the sense of sheer force and power, and may even add to the otherworldliness of the Firebird, because to be honest, it kind of was for the world of ballet at the time.
Right. At the end of the variation, the Firebird finally reaches for one of the coveted golden apples.
Yes.
But just when she turns to fly away, Ivan seizes his moment. He rushes out from behind the golden apple tree and grabs her. For a moment, neither of them move. But then suddenly, the Firebird screeches and the fight is on.
In this scene, you can really hear the struggle of the Firebird trying to break free, and Ivan holding on for dear life in the music, with the same frenzied passage being echoed back and forth between the woodwinds, the Firebird, and the strings, Ivan. The choreography mirrors this, with the woodwinds piercing through each time the Firebird tries to free herself, and the strings whenever Ivan prevails.
Every time she flies, you hear the flutes and the woodwinds.
And whenever he brings her down, you hear the strings again. It's genius
it's
work,
insane.
you guys. You can really see the fruits of the collaborative efforts between Fokine and Stravinsky as they created this piece, because you guys,
they go like this.
It's perfect. It's so perfect.
Finally, at the end of this sort of fight scene, Ivan, despite the Firebird's heavy resistance, manages to restrain her wings and leaves the Firebird with nothing left to do but to beg for her release.
What follows is a pas de deux, also known as the supplication of the Firebird, which shows the Firebird's plea for her freedom and the natural process of her surrender. In the beginning of the pas de deux, we hear an almost mournful melody played on the oboe instead of on the piccolo and flutes, with the strings of Ivan playing a very prevalent part in the background of the music, and this might be interpreted as her being subdued or restrained by Ivan.
There is a point in the middle of the pas de deux where the Firebird tries to muster the strength for another attempt to break free, and this is reflected in sort of this faster tempo. There's a reintroduction to the woodwinds in this section, and choreographically in the way that the Firebird keeps turning, twisting, and trying to fly out of his grasp. The lifts in this particular section are beautifully choreographed, as they give the illusion that the ballerina isn't being lifted by the danseur at all, but rather is sort of flying away on her own. But of course, following this, Ivan wins out, and the same slow theme from the beginning of the pas de deux returns on the strings as Ivan contains her once more.
This pas de deux overall has an incredibly immersive and cinematic effect, showing the ebb and flow of the Firebird's morale and Ivan's relentless persistence and eventual victory. For the dancers, this is a very beautiful but very difficult pas de deux, because pas de deux, translated step 4-2, is a highly collaborative work, and so to simultaneously work together while making it look like you're fighting against each other, it's a unique kind of challenge.
It is. It's hard to lift the ballerina into the air while also looking like you're pulling her down from the sky. So it requires a lot of mutual trust, consistency, and obviously loads of rehearsal time to make it look convincing while also not actively preventing each other from doing your job.
Anyhow, by the end of the pas de deux, the Firebird finally surrenders with no strength left to fight, finally realizing she's met her match in Ivan's willpower.
But Ivan in turn realizes that the Firebird will never live on in his captivity, and so stepping back, he releases her and declares her freedom. The Firebird, of course, is delighted by this turn of events, and she offers the prince one of her enchanted golden feathers in a gesture of gratitude, promising to return to him if he brandishes it in a moment of need.
That being said, in other versions or interpretations of the story, the Firebird herself is the one who offers the feather first in exchange for her freedom, kind of like a gecko, if you would, but that's probably the least glamorous way to explain it. After the Firebird presents Ivan with the feather, her usual voice of the flute returns as Ivan fully releases her, and she flies away, leaving Ivan alone once again in the middle of the enchanted garden.
Ivan watches the Firebird go, still holding on to the magical feather. And we hear his theme return as he conceals the feather inside his coat. But just as he turns to go, a familiar motif on the bassoon echoes through the forest.
We heard this theme earlier in the introduction of the ballet. If you remember, those 4 repeated notes followed by the 5 on chromatic descent. Kotschei.
Ivan turns and sees the castle in the distance where the sound comes from, and naturally decides to investigate. I mean, he's got a magical feather in his pocket. What's he got to lose? As Ivan approaches the gate, 12 lovely princesses emerge from the castle, as they're only given freedom to play in Kotschei's garden in the late hours of the night. Ivan quickly hides himself by the stone wall to watch, and as the princesses appear, a short melody is played on flute, then the oboe, then the harp, then the French horn, then the violin, then the clarinet, then again in various combinations. And this sort of gives us a glimpse of each of the different voices and personalities of the princesses conversing, even if it's just for a moment.
They're not even like real key characters here, but we think it's really cool that Stravinsky kind of gave them each a moment.
Yeah, he gave them each a voice.
Yeah. The melody after this very short exchange becomes the princess's leitmotif or theme, and it is played on the stringed instruments. Put a pin in this one as well, because this motif will appear later in the ballet. The main attraction for the princesses, of course, is the golden apple tree, because playing with fruit is apparently the ideal pastime for imprisoned princesses at 2 a.m. Ivan observes them from a short distance in hiding, but when the 13th and youngest princess, Tsarevna, arrives in the garden, the prince immediately falls in love. But in this point in time, none of the princesses even suspect that they're being watched.
Tsarevna approaches the tree and shakes it, and the golden apples tumble down from their branches. Again, the apple falling sounds are reflected in the music. And this sets us off on the scherzo, which is a very light-hearted dance as the princesses play in the garden with the apples. This scene at first glance seems to starkly contrast the darker eeriness of all of the earlier scenes. And with this sort of energetic, almost chirpy melody, diatonic this time obviously for our human characters, it brings a much more human feel to the scene. But because the princesses are under Kotschei's spell and captivity, there is always a subtle chromatic passage that lies beneath the main melody.
If you listen really closely.
If you listen like really hard. And it's sort of like a haunting reminder that no matter how much fun the girls might be having, they are still all under Kotschei's possession.
Choreographically as well, the princesses sort of have their own motif that will come back later in the ballet. It's this little saute and a balance and a little pedal turn-ish step. It's all very girlish and very natural, and it adds a sort of groundedness and realism in contrast to the Firebird's ethereal variation and positive.
In the middle of the dance, we do also get to hear Tsarevna's theme,
yes,
played on the clarinet, which again, put a pin in it, we will hear it later in the ballet. Everything comes full circle in this ballet. The princess's playtime comes to an abrupt halt as the prince steps forward from his hiding spot and approaches them. All 13 princesses freeze for a second, having not been expecting a visitor at all, and most likely terrified of what this might mean for him, loitering around Kotschei's perimeters as if begging to be turned to stone.
The princesses flee, but Tsarevna, curious, lingers. And Ivan proceeds to introduce himself and even offers her a golden apple that he had collected, which she takes hastily before quickly running away. This moment of hesitation and shyness and kind of bashfulness provides us with a sort of starting point for the relationship to grow. The scene is short, but the music here so clearly portrays the dialogue between Ivan and Tsarevna, with Ivan's theme returning once again on the French horn, Tsarevna's quiet replies on the clarinet, and there's even a faint tremor of the strings in the background, which might portray the other princesses murmuring and gossiping in the background.
The dance that follows this exchange is less of a dance and more of the actual live unfolding of the princesses' trust toward Ivan, and also Ivan and Tsarevna's love for each other. You'll see it in the beginning in the formations. Ivan and Tsarevna are kept on opposite sides of the stage, with the other princesses sort of shielding the youngest of their sisterhood from the stranger, in part possibly to save him from being inevitably turned to stone, and also to protect her from the resulting heartbreak.
It may be assumed that all of the other princesses have fallen in love with men before who have passed by the enchanted forest, only to lose them to Kotschei's heartless curse. But even despite this, the princesses eventually recognize the love between Ivan and Tsarevna, and finally allow them to meet under the golden apple tree.
The melody in this piece does in fact originate from an actual Russian folk tune, which is kind of sweet, really. It adds to the humanness for one, and in fact it could even be interpreted as them sort of singing these old songs together.
As a side note, this melody appears in Rimsky-Korsakov's Sinfonietta on Russian themes, which is kind of a nice Easter egg referencing Stravinsky's teacher. Anyhow, by the end, Ivan and Tsarevna are now deeply in love, but as they embrace, a trumpet sounds, Kotschei summoning the princesses back to the castle. The princesses flee to the castle in a hurry, but as they do, you can hear the princesses' theme once again echoing on various instruments like before as they panic to one another on the way.
Tsarevna, meanwhile, is sort of torn between returning to her captivity or staying and thereby risking Ivan's life. But eventually she pulls away from him, imploring him to save himself by not following her back to the castle.
She turns just one more time and offers her final goodbye, possibly forever for all she knows, and disappears. Ivan returns the gesture, if only to the empty garden, and his theme returns once again, almost mournful at first, then more and more intense as he resolves to save the princesses.
Ivan, in his determination, isn't the least bit dissuaded by Tsarevna's warning. Love makes us all a little stupid. And he approaches the gate. He flings them open, which immediately triggers a series of blaring alarms, and before he can even step foot inside the gate, an entire host of Kotschei's monsters come flooding out of the castle.
Ivan attempts to climb back over the wall from whence he came, trying again and again to escape, but Kotschei's guards pull him down and hold him hostage. Behind them, more and more monsters pour out of the gate, surrounding him, and each group of monsters that enters brings its own leitmotif to the music, which will reappear throughout the scene. There's an erratic, fluttering motif of the bats on the woodwinds, and the clanking of skeletons on the xylophones, etc., etc. The different leitmotifs scream on top of one another, which really captures the chaos of the moment. But then, the cacophony is silenced by the long, low sounds of the horns, announcing Kotschei's approach.
Ivan, still flanked by two monstrous guards, watches as the monsters bow themselves to the ground in reverence. And with a rumble of thunder, Kotschei the Immortal appears in the entrance of the castle. The entire forest goes still.
Kotschei slowly descends from the castle with several eerie, chromatic passages as he muses to himself about what a fine addition to his statue collection Ivan would make. And then, without warning, Kotschei's theme, the 4 repeated notes followed by the 5 descending chromatics, blares out on the horns as he demands that Ivan approach. This entire pantomime scene is undoubtedly the most legible one in the entire ballet, as the pantomime gestures are quite literally mirrored in the music. Kotschei's very voice.
Another roll of thunder peals through the air as Kotschei beckons to Ivan a second time, and the guards throw Ivan at his feet. We hear Ivan's theme once more as he sizes up the evil sorcerer, and then proceeds to mock him. Youth makes us all a bit bold, which immediately results in another huge uproar, and eventually Ivan's death sentence.
Well done, Ivan. Upon hearing this, the princesses, who have been watching behind the gate this entire time, finally run out to intercede for Ivan. At this point, we can hear the princesses' theme return, the same one that we heard when they entered the garden, as Tsarevna pleads with Kotschei to spare her prince. But the lilting strings are harshly interrupted by Kotschei, who laughs and sends them away with another crash of thunder. Once again, another brilliant pantomime scene, perfectly illustrated with the music and in the mime.
The moment of Ivan's execution has arrived, and Kotschei conjures his power, unleashing it in Ivan's direction, pinning him to the stone wall along with all of the other stone men. Ivan tries to escape, but Kotschei does so again, this time stronger, and Ivan feels himself beginning to fuse with the wall behind him. Kotschei musters his power a third time, but as he unleashes the final spell, Ivan, in a moment of sudden genius, pulls the Firebird's feather from his jacket, waving it in the air to summon her. Again, the same flickering feather theme as when the Firebird first gave Ivan the feather.
Immediately after, as promised, we hear the fluttering sound of the Firebird's approach, and soon enough, she arrives on the scene and immediately understands the assignment. She begins circling the area the way hawks might do while hunting, and then dances in the middle of them, just a short passage, coupe front, coupe back, and a pas de bourrée. And this passage is sort of the Firebird magic step, if you would, as she establishes her power over the monsters and forces Kotschei and his subjects to dance with her under her spell.
The same passage in the music repeats over and over, gradually adding in more and more instruments as more and more monsters fall under the Firebird's spell.
A piercing shriek of the Firebird, almost like a war cry, and this ushers us into the great infernal dance, the musical pinnacle and honestly the most iconic part of the entire ballet. This number is not only fantastical in its magnitude, but is also extremely symbolic as it references almost every leitmotif in the ballet we've heard so far. We start off with the same motif that we heard when Kotschei's guards first took Ivan captive, but it's way less ominous now and much more chaotic, and interrupted periodically with the screech of the Firebird.
At some point, we hear Kotschei trying to intervene. He's watching this whole scene unfold in utter horror, but he also feels himself being pulled under the spell. We hear the first 3 barked notes of his leitmotif, almost like a half-finished sentence, before the Firebird returns with her own motif from the pas de deux, this time faster and more powerful as she forces the monsters into motion again.
The 2 parts of the monsters theme replay again and again on various instruments, overlapping and interrupting one another as Kotschei fails to regain control of them. And the Firebird, meanwhile, simply basks in the midst of the exquisite chaos that she created like it's just another Tuesday.
You can't be a bad protagonist unless you make some chaos. That's how the thing works. Another familiar theme comes into play as the princesses are pulled into the dance. They too are pulled under the Firebird's spell, not because they are evil, not at all, but simply because they are also under Kotschei's curse. It's Tsarevna's wistful theme and the same choreographic passage from the Dance with the Golden Apples, but this time much more dynamic and much more desperate, with the princesses hiding their faces in tears of horror. The monsters are compelled to join in, drowning the melody in absolute chaos again, but Kotschei tries to intervene once more, bringing it all to a momentary halt with another clap of thunder.
But it's not long before the monster's theme revives with a faint pulse as they're forced to keep dancing, and it grows louder and louder as the Firebird forces the last of their energy out of them. Even Kotschei can't resist the pull. We hear the first part of his leitmotif again, the same consecutive repeated notes, but the rhythm stammers uncontrollably as the Firebird's power overtakes him.
As the princesses and monsters are thrown into a final frenzy, we hear Tsarevna's theme once again, drowned in the dissonance of the monsters, almost like the princesses are screaming over the noise.
Then finally we have our final showdown, so to speak. Kotschei's half-finished theme arguing back and forth with the Firebird's fluttering motif on the woodwinds. The Firebird overpowers him, however, darting to and fro amidst all the madness, and with one final screech, the monsters fall at her feet, utterly exhausted. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the Infernal Dance in a nutshell. Let us know if you want to see a real-time commentary of the Infernal Dance, because you guys, we could pick this apart one phrase at a time, honestly.
Literally, it's so
genius,
good.
and it's so good.
It's so good.
Once again, you see that really tight collaboration between Fokine and Stravinsky, really working the choreography and the symbolism and the music together into just one perfect, cohesive piece.
And now, a study on contrast. The silence settles over the forest. The monsters and princesses are too tired to move, and even Kotschei is momentarily tranquilized. What follows is what's known as the Firebird's lullaby, which is the second solo that she performs in this ballet, where she lulls Kotschei and his monsters to sleep after all the exertion. This solo features a haunting melody that recalls several passages from the Padada, as if the Firebird is remembering her promise to Ivan with this lullaby.
Even in this slower variation, the Firebird's movement quality never slips into a soft, fluid swan arms territory. Like, yes, it is slow and probably not as sharp or as quick as earlier, but there's always a sense of sharpness and controlled tension waiting to break. Even the slower wing flaps have a sharpness and like a rawness to the edges, and each of the head movements is very quick and bird-like, and the hands flutter with a residual power. Distinctly Firebird.
You can also see the same passage as earlier, the Firebird magic step.
Yes.
When she was first putting the monsters under the spell, that coupe front, coupe back, and pas de bourrée, only much slower and much more deliberately. Like she's just using a little bit more of her magic to really tie everything together and finish the job.
Once the monsters and princesses and even Kotschei are asleep, the Firebird summons Ivan and tells him the secret to Kotschei's immortality. His soul is hidden in a magic egg inside his castle, and if the egg is destroyed, then the sorcerer, likewise, will also be destroyed. So Ivan quietly steps into the castle and retrieves the chest containing the magic egg. The folklore explains that because Kotschei's soul is in the egg, whoever moves the egg can, to some degree, control the sorcerer himself. So as Ivan brings the chest out to the middle of the garden, it's no wonder that Kotschei senses the movement and stirs awake, as do all of his subjects.
As Ivan opens the chest, Kotschei goes into absolute hysterics, as do all of his evil subjects.
Now frantic and desperate once more, we hear Kotschei's blaring, half-finished motif in a frenzied, panicked rhythm as he realizes his very soul is at Ivan's mercy. But he stops himself short and falls completely silent the moment Ivan lifts up the egg in his hands.
Ivan, already triumphant, teases Kotschei with several fake attempts to break the egg, because he certainly did not make it all the way to the end of this ballet, only to pass up on having a little fun torturing an immortal sorcerer.
And the music here reflects this, as the tremors on the strings imitate the motif that was played when Kotschei tried to turn him to stone. And so this scene is sort of Ivan flipping the narrative on him in the most cunning, brutal, and merciless way.
Rightly so, Ivan.
Good
boy, Ivan.
Tell him right, Ivan. The Firebird stands nearby, keeping the monsters at bay, and also seemingly enjoying this just as much as he is.
At last, Ivan swings. Once, twice, and then smashes the egg with a loud, terrifying crash, destroying Kotschei, his monsters, and his castle in one single blow.
We did it. I feel like we won something.
I know!
And we're still sitting here talking like we have been for the past hour. Finally, we have come to the final tableau of the ballet. And as the first light of dawn appears, we see the subtle breath of movement in the stone walls of Kotschei's garden. At long last, the men who have been turned to stone are now restored now that Kotschei is destroyed and the curse has been lifted. They are reunited, of course, with the princesses they had once fallen in love with and tried to save. And thanks to Ivan and the Firebird, they are now free to be married.
The music here, we should add, is fully diatonic now,
yes,
representing the humanness of the scene as the princes and princesses reunite, completely free from their spiritual curses. The melody stays completely the same throughout this final scene, but it does gradually build, adding in more and more instruments as the dawn light goes brighter and the weight of Ivan's victory sets in.
However, there is one slight change that Stravinsky makes in the middle of this piece, the beat drop, if you will, and that is the change in time signature from an 8-2, or just like counted in an 8, to a 7-4, which is not very common in ballet at all, because 7s are hard to dance to in a world full of 8s, but in a poetic light, this change might actually be quite a significant and symbolic one, as the number 7 traditionally represents completeness, perfection, or even a connection to divine protection, or in this case, the Firebird.
At long last, Ivan and Tsarevna arrive on the scene in royal robes, as Ivan has earned his place as king and is finally able to take Tsarevna as his queen. The choreography in this scene is like the melody, extremely pared down. No flashy tricks at all, and not even any dancing. Instead, this final scene leans fully into the emotional power and poignance of simplicity, which honestly is incredibly impactful after all of the chaos earlier in the ballet.
Ivan and Tsarevna finally ascend to the palace as the sun rises fully over the land. And according to the myth, the Firebird flies away forever in her own freedom. And though in most traditional productions, the Firebird does not make a final reappearance in this scene, if you listen really closely in the final strong notes of the music, we can hear the triumphant crow of her chromatic theme ring out, blessing all the marriages and covering them with her power and protection.
I love this ballet,
especially after going through all like the roller coaster of like emotions and themes, the chaos and the calm and the panic and the triumph at the end. It's everything, you guys. I can't. I need a minute.
I'm destroyed. Death by Firebird. Death by Firebird. Here lies Jordan and Eden, who died after fangirling over the Firebird.
You guys, it's so beautiful, masterfully done. Again, the music and the dancing, the choreography, the symbolism, the story, all meshed together so perfectly.
Like, as a unified work, it's just like
incredible
mastery.
It's mastery. There you have it, everybody. That was our very certified analysis on the Firebird. We really hope that this video could help open your eyes to just how masterful this ballet is, maybe helps you understand the intricacies of it, or just helps you to enjoy it that much more fully when you watch it live, or even just listen to the score.
Speaking of, if you made it all the way to the end of this video,
yes,
this is your sign to go watch a Firebird, preferably supporting your local ballet or symphony, but honestly, we don't care how, just please see a Firebird. You will be blessed and gain 100 XP morale points, we promise. And honestly, we hope nothing more than that the Firebird will be able to touch you the same way that it's touched us, and countless of other people around the world and throughout the ages.
If you enjoyed this video and you would like to see more ballet analyses that we have done, then feel free to check out this playlist link above and below, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And also, if you'd like to help us keep making videos like this, then please do consider becoming a patron.
All of the Ballet Nerd fun that we get to have together is made possible by y'all's support.
Yes.
And so if you want to ensure that the Ballet Nerd world keeps on spinning, then you can become a patron at the link below or at patreon.com/balletrain.
And of course, our biggest, most heartfelt thank you to all of our patrons for making today's video possible and for supporting the global Ballet Nerd movement. We love you guys so much, and we appreciate your support and everything you do to help us and our team keep doing what we do.
Anyways! Oh, this video was too short.
It was too much fun to make.
It was too much fun. Anyways, I think that is all from us for now. This is Ballet Rain signing off. Until the next video.
Bye! Stravinsky, of course, was absolutely thrilled. So thrilled, in fact, that he reportedly began working on sketches of the ballet before Diaghilev had even given him a formal commission offer.
You could say he was very Igor.
You need to leave. Did you need to do that?
Was that necessary? Something compelled me.